Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, the Syrian situation is developing rapidly, and the imperialist cause is taking it on the chin in quite a few of these most recent developments. The very interesting news this morning is that a top commander of the Free Syrian Army, that is to say a moderate terrorist, not an extremist terrorist, has been killed by one of the al-Qaeda extremists in this despicable combination. The victim is Kamal Hamami. Kamal Hamami, a commander of the Free Syrian Army, again, allegedly a moderate, not the extreme wing, has been assassinated by the al-Qaeda groupings. Now, this Kamal Hamami is also known under the name of Abu Basir al-Ladkhani. He is allegedly one of the top 30 members of the Supreme Military Command of the, in quotes, Free Syrian Army. Gee, I wonder what General Salim Idris, the golden boy, the darling of the CIA, has to say about this. I wonder if Hamami himself, Hamami Ladkhani, as he's sometimes known, whether this Hamami Ladkhani is also a darling of the CIA. Now, the killing was carried out personally by a certain Louay Mekdad. Mekdad is, he's telling us, this is the guy reporting the assassination. Mekdad is telling us he's the FSA Supreme Command Political Coordinator, the political commissar of Idris, it looks like. He says that the killer is Abu Ayman al-Baghdadi. Al-Baghdadi sounds like he's coming in from Iraq, probably somebody who's killed a lot of U.S. forces there. He is the emir of the coastal region for this alleged Islamic State, which is what one of the groups at least wants, right? Whether it's the Nusra network, that's harder to say, but one of the members of the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. The Levant, of course, the Levante, the east, right? The place where the sun comes up. That's the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. It's essentially Lebanon and Syria, and it goes inland up to a point. So members of that emirate, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. So these are terrorists coming in from Iraq. They are undoubtedly veterans of the fighting against the U.S. forces there. How interesting. And these are the people that the British and the French want to support, and that the Obama administration says we should now arm. Well, that's not a good idea, is it? So the fighting among the death squads is now the shocking new reality. And, of course, that means if you give advanced weapons to the so-called moderates of the FSA, then along come the Nusra people and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and they kill the moderate beneficiaries, and they take the advanced weapons and use them according to their nefarious goals. Even the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the British tailor in Coventry, linked to Rifat Assad, right, the half-brother of the elder Assad, right, this older group, they admit that there have been numbers of clashes between the people coming in from Iraq and the other more indigenous people. The FSA and the Islamic State have had violent exchanges in several areas of Syria over the past 2 weeks, showing the growing antagonism between Assad's foes. Last Friday, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant killed an FSA rebel in Idlib province and cut his head off, decapitated him. And there have been attacks in many provinces, says this tailor, Rami Abdel Rahman, right, paid by Rifat Assad, as far as published reports have alleged. So this is the situation. It is a tremendous embarrassment for anybody proposing to support these killers, and that includes the Obama administration. So remember, the benchmarks are these. Obama has one merit. Up to now, he says no to the 1,000-bomber raid and the 5 divisions and the tanks and the infantry and the big ground assault and everything that goes with it. No to that. No to the carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea. No, 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 says Obama. Do it all on the cheap. Do it all through these other means, right? Use proxy forces, play Turkey, play Egypt, play others against the government of Assad, but that's not working. So it's important to hold on to the fact that Obama is saying no to the big war. He says yes to the little war, absolutely, to the treacherous war, the stealth war, cyber, economic sanctions, assassinations, drones, special forces, proxies, buck passing, you name it, does all that. But that's not working. So the important thing is to keep Obama, to stop Obama from declaring the big war until the death squads have been eliminated from the picture, dispersed or hurled to their reward. So this is the relevance now also of the other side of the coin, which this news this morning is going to make worse. New front open in Syria as rebels say al-Qaeda attack means war. Now, open war between the rebel factions. How interesting. Yesterday already, Thursday, July 12th, we have the main headline of the Washington Post. Divisions on the Hill stall Syria plan. The Obama administration's month-old plan to arm opposition fighters in Syria has stalled as a result of congressional disagreements over whether and how to aid the rebels seeking to oust President Bashar al-Assad. And here we find the people who have failed. Briefings and personal visits have come from top administration officials, including Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of State John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, and we'll get to him later. We want him impeached. And the CIA Director John O'Brien have failed to shake strongly held views in the U.S. Congress, according to various administration officials and congressional sources. So let's just look at a little bit of this delicious detail. Now, this is something that people in the United States can and must contribute to. Those congressional hacks will be going home for the summer vacation before too long. They're going to have public meetings. You've got to go to them and say, not one penny, not one bullet, nothing for the death squads, for the killers, the crazies in Syria. We don't want any part of them, and if you do, that will be a Nuremberg crime. So what we have in this interesting article, the vocabulary above all, is highly interesting. We're told that it's a quagmire in the making, and we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is the edition for Friday, the 12th of July. Congratulations to the French for their national holiday coming up on Sunday, the 14th of July, right? The French Revolution, a very interesting thing to keep in mind when you look at Egypt, because there are some interesting comparisons, which we will elaborate maybe a little bit today, but primarily in future weeks. Right now, it's the fact that the al-Qaeda branch, the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, their top coastal emir, has killed Kamal Hamami, a moderate, in quotes, Free Syrian Army commander. So the takfiris, the holier-than-thous, the sectarians, I'm tempted to call them the Gnasio Islamists, right? Remember the old Gnasio Lutherans of the late 1500s, right? The real hardliners, the real doctrinaires, nobody good enough for them, and if you're not good enough, watch out, they'll behead you. So this Kamal Hamami is dead, and this means open war between the moderate FSA of Idris and the al-Qaeda link. Now, interesting, which way will the Nusra boys go? Which way will the Farouk brigades go? Right, the Farouk are the people who did the cannibalism of the disemboweled victim in the recent video. So all of this going on. And certainly this will have an impact on the U.S. Congress. You see, the political stupidity of these characters is overwhelming, right? They have no sense of what they're doing. They are not clever, to put it mildly. But neither is the Obama administration. Now, I would have to say this at the beginning of this consideration. This Obama strategy of getting the money from Congress to arm the rebels is so feckless and so stupid that one might think this is a strategy designed a priori to fail, that Obama wants it to fail, gets him off the hook, and switches the attention to his emissaries, right, as we heard, Biden, Kerry, and Brennan, and to the relevant congressional committee. So Obama comes out looking okay, whereas these other people are the ones that are slogging there in the congressional mud at the base of Capitol Hill. So here's what we have. The approach of the Obama regime, first of all, is narrow, narrow, narrow. They're going with the people on the intelligence committees, right? Mike Rogers in the House, reactionary Republican, the odious totalitarian liberal Feinstein on the Senate side, and their respective ranking members. I think it's Dutch Ruppersberger on the House side, but and I think who is it? Corker on the perhaps not Corker, but somebody else. Here's the thing: it's a very narrow approach, and all the senators in particular and congressmen also who are excluded from these briefings are boiling with rage and resentment. And here's the quote: the strategy being used, according to Corker, is what the Obama administration is seeking is to do this, in other words, arm the killers, arm the terrorists, covertly, so that they never need to make a case to the American people, and only a handful of people are involved, says Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, senior Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I think it's a terrible policy. Corker and Menendez, mafioso from New Jersey, remember him with his angel going down there to the Caribbean. They co-sponsored a bill in May authorizing the administration to send weapons, but neither one of them, not Corker and not Menendez, has been allowed to get a secret briefing on what Obama wants to do. They're being very clumsy about this, says Corker. Time is a-wasting. This is beyond ridiculous. Now, again, this is, maybe it's just normal ineptitude. It seems to me this is by design, that Obama is sabotaging his own effort. But again, it's the mud is sticking to others, because Obama is not mentioned in these stories anywhere near as much as his various minions. But then we find, and this reminds us, throughout the last year, writes the Washington Post, a growing number of lawmakers from both parties, including then Senator Kerry, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, have called for increased U.S. involvement and a consideration of a no-fly zone to protect civilians in rebel-held areas from Assad's air bombardments. An administration debate over whether to send weapons was never resolved. So in other words, this reminds us, Kerry has been a hawk on Syria for years, from the beginning, okay, even though he was the one schmoozing with Assad, right, the private dinner with Assad, Madame Assad, and also this Teresa Heinz from Portuguese colonial empire days. We have certain brand X, certain wrong-headed, foolish, unreliable accounts on the internet saying, oh, no, it's impossible. Oh, wonderful John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones could never have tried to have a coup d'etat on June 12th to start the bombing immediately. Oh, no, he would never do that. He's a dove. He's a dove. I'm sorry. He is a hawk. He wants to bomb. That's his entire shtick. And we're told, oh, this must be some kind of a plot by the Israelis. Yeah, right. If you think that the Skull and Bones faction needs to take lessons in evil from the Israelis, you are ignoring quite a few U.S. wars that were being carried on before the Israelis ever even existed. So this is a usual cop-out. And, of course, then we look deeper, we find the individual involved, or one of them at least, is somebody who believes in flying saucers and, interestingly enough, also believes that there's an underground civilization which is under our feet, but we don't know it. Now, this seems to jive with the Vril, V-R-I-L, right? Vril, Bulwer Lytton's novel on Vril that was then taken up by, oh my gosh, by mystics linked to the totalitarian movements in Central Europe in the 1920s and 1930s. Need I say more? So, anyway, the upshot of all this is Kerry is a hawk, and don't have any illusions about that. And Kerry does not need any Israeli to tell him how to be evil. He learned that very early on. So that's the situation. We have to hope that on this one, the congressional logjam will go on. And, of course, we're getting other assistance from the rebels themselves. One rebel, and I think this is actually the guy who did the cannibalism, right? He disemboweled his dead prisoner. He's saying to the U.S. Congress, if you don't give me sophisticated weapons, I will start disemboweling and cannibalizing more. So take that, you people on the Hill. So good. Let them put that in their pipes and smoke it. And we'll be back on the World Crisis Radio in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, of course, a word of caution, which is that when things go as bad as this for the imperialist, terrorist side of things, this is when they lash out. It's time for yellow alert, certainly, for new Gulf of Tonkin incidents, new kinds of false flag events. It would take something pretty big because by virtue of having cried wolf so many times on this chemical issue, the terrorists have largely discredited themselves, right? There were reports in the past week that barrels and barrels full of toxic chemicals were found under the control of the rebels. And, of course, the central event on this front in the past week, the distinguished Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, in a formal press conference in the Foreign Ministry in Moscow, has announced that the government of the Russian Federation possesses incontrovertible proof that the rebels, the terrorist side, the anti-Assad people, have used poison gas. And in assembling this evidence, the Russian Federation has rigorously respected the chain of custody, the various technical rules governing the superintending and administration of the various pieces of evidence. These were gathered by the Russian Federation and never left their custody. They are not random things that have been brought in by journalists or passersby or paid informants or anything of the sort. And Russia says that they have transmitted this proof, convincing, incontrovertible evidence, to Ban Ki-moon and others at the UN Secretariat, the UN Security Council, and others at the UN. And that very soon the Russian Federation will proceed to publish this documentation on the use of poison gas by the terrorist death squad rebels, so dear to the British, the French, the Israelis, the neocons, and indeed to the Obama administration. So that's one important side. Now, we're still waiting. The U.S. government said they had proof. Well, where's the proof? Don't come to us in this day and age, post-Colin Powell at the UN, and expect us to believe you. We don't believe you. We don't believe Ben Rhodes. Ben Rhodes is a flim-flam artist, right? Ben Rhodes was the most despicable character in the summer of last year with his fake Syrian television programs, right? Replacing the actual Syrian programming with CIA programming. I'm sure that was really interesting to watch. So we don't believe in Ben Rhodes. We want the proof, and if we don't get it, we're obviously we're not going to go down this road. And it's clear the White House has no such proof, whereas it's also clear that the Russian Federation does have such proof. So we have gone more or less full circle, as the Washington Post also points out, right? There was an attempt about a year ago, this was Ben Rhodes, the assassination of several key members of the Syrian National Defense Council, the attempted decapitation of the regime, an attempted coup d'etat, but the Syrian state, which again I would say built up on Nasserist criteria, and it was once part of the United Arab Republic of Nasser. So there's a distinguished pedigree. It turns out that the Syrian state is more powerful than the television manipulation of little Ben Rhodes and his little Generation X myrmidons from the White House. So that takes us to the current situation. The UPI correspondent, Martin Walker, speaking on National Public Radio this morning, expresses his hope for a stalemate. He says he has seen a stalemate over the past 6 weeks, and that the rebels are now fighting among themselves as a result of the stalemate. No, it's not a stalemate. This is a ongoing defeat. This is, if you like, somewhat in slow motion, that certainly because of the logistical problems and other problems involved, but no doubt that the rebels are losing, and they're losing massively. And that is the key to why they're fighting among themselves. Case in point, The World. The World is a program, a kind of an international summary of news. It's got a lot of input from the BBC, but also others. On the World of Public Radio International, Paul Wood of the BBC in Beirut has conceded that the terrorist death squad still holding certain neighborhood of Homs are doomed. They are strapping on their suicide vests and saying goodbye, and they are headed for the last roundup. So the city of Homs, which I feel very bad about the destruction there. I had visited Homs in November of 2011, and the city was still intact at that point. Met with the governor of Homs, met with the opposition people, too, Marxist opposition, middle-class, sort of liberal opposition. Noticed that the religious leaders, be it the Greek Orthodox, the Maronite, the Melkite, the Syriac, all of them supporting the Assad government. So seculars and Christians and Alawites and quite a few Sunnis supporting the Sunni business class, certainly, supporting Assad. This city has now been partially destroyed by the rebellion, but it is now likely that it will be definitively liberated within the next month, I would say. And at that point, the fighting moves on to Aleppo. And in Aleppo, we will have the final decision, I think, which is very likely to lead to the substantial collapse of the death squad rebellion in Syria. And this is the urgency for the British and the French. Let's just look at this for a second. There have been riots. You can call this a food riot, really, in Aleppo. They are concerned about, the inhabitants of Aleppo are concerned that the terrorists have put up a food blockade, and they're not allowing anything in. The rebels say no food, no medicine, no baby products, no milk, no vegetables, no meat, no bread, all banned by the death squad. So the people just said, well, we might as well get out and protest as sit here and starve to death. So they come out and they say, open the path and let the food in. The death squad rebels then come out and start firing their guns in the air. What this shows is that the hearts and minds have turned against the death squads definitively. Nobody could put up with this kind of rule. And, of course, they've got Sharia courts in there, lopping off hands, lopping off feet, humiliating women, God knows what. We've also got other questions. They as we already heard, they beheaded one FSA prisoner. They've also executed a small boy who said something like, not even the prophet could get served today, or not even the prophet could get a cup of coffee. So they decide that's blasphemy, and they have to execute him. So this is bad news. And this, again, the U.S. Congress will please take note. So the food blockade in Aleppo indicates that these rebels are politically defeated. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., urging you to keep up with all this at Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. On Tarpley.net, we got a new article this week detailing the dynamics of the counter coup in Egypt, which we'll talk about very soon here. It's a counter coup. It's a coup d'etat against Morsi as he was planning a war coup, starting a war with Syria and or Ethiopia. And to avoid a catastrophic foreign war, there've got to be some pretty decent people in the Egyptian army who step forward, or in the top administration, or both. I'm guessing Nasserists to come forward and oust this foreign puppet, Morsi, who was obviously schmoozing with Ann Patterson, the U.S. ambassador, and we'll get to that stuff in just a minute. So keep up with Tarpley.net and the Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. Lots and lots of stuff in the past, more things than I can cover, even in these broadcasts. So if you're not getting Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, you're selling yourself short, quite frankly. So few more items on Syria, right? The Congress has delayed the weapons, we know. Right now the fighting is at Homs. It will soon be at Aleppo. There are lots of other places. There's fighting going on in Homs, in Palmyra, in Latakia, in Aleppo. And the rebels are fighting among themselves in larger battles, not just this assassination, in Raqqa, in northeast Syria, and in Idlib near the Turkish border. Maybe the fighting will spill over into Turkey and teach Erdogan another lesson. Don't let terrorists come into your country, or they will carry on terrorism, because that is their nature. The rebels are so weak, they're screaming they want a no-fly zone, no-fly zone. That's what Kerry tried to give them. He failed. All right, so they can't get a no-fly zone at the moment, right, because nobody wants to go do it outside the UN, and Russia is standing firm. No backdoor deal. Still looking for a backdoor deal. Can't find any. Still boiling the lists. Can't find any. The rebels then start whining about humanitarian emergency. They want a humanitarian corridor cut through. It's an invasion under a different name. The Russians, thank God. God bless the Russians. They have blocked that at the UN Security Council. And then the rebels pulled out. They want a Ramadan truce. No, don't do it. These people are not godly. They use it as a cloak, as we'll try to explain. So the other thing is a reshuffle, right? Assad has reshuffled his government. I must say, when I was in Syria, November 2011, the people that I talked to said there is an old guard. There was an old guard around Assad, around Bashar Assad. These are people that were associated with his father, Hafez Assad. That regime, I think, it was qualitatively inferior. In other words, the current one is much better. It has many, many advantages and good features compared to the previous one. Anyways, my sources told me these people from the old guard, they think that they're the founding fathers. They think that they're all heroes, whereas the population regards them as thieves. So it looks to me like that's who got ousted from the Syrian government. On the whole, is probably a step in the right direction. So the main thing, again, vigilance, watch out for Gulf of Tonkin, watch out for false flag events. Don't believe, frankly, remember, the vaccination, the inoculation is immunize people. Don't believe any false flag that points to Syria, because it is guaranteed at this point to be manufactured and a fraud. The Geneva Conference, the U.S. paid lip service. The Russians were sincerely interested in setting this up. The Syrian government accepted. The death squads say no, and now they are a million miles away. And in all this, the rebels have a new political puppet prime minister. I won't even dignify this character with any particular comments. Now, intimately connected to Syria is, of course, Egypt. They used to be one country. There's no way around it. These are two prime countries of the Arab world. So what do we have here? Well, this was a counter coup. This is the analysis that I think most faithfully reproduces the truth of this situation. It is a counter coup. It was not arranged by the U.S. government. The U.S. government is scrambling to get on the train now that's leaving the station. You got to remember, in a country as big as Egypt, once something happens that's decisive, everybody runs to get on board because you don't want to be excluded from this, because it is such a key cockpit forum for everything that's going on. So far, the losers. Previously, the people backing Morsi, Qatar, Turkey, Libya. That is Qatar. In Qatar, we've had, as Morsi was falling, so was the old emir, the extremist emir of Qatar. I have compared that guy to Philippe Égalité. In other words, the nobleman, in this case, royal, who decides to try to ride the tiger of revolution. Didn't work for Philippe Égalité. He lost his head on the scaffold to the guillotine, and the emir of Qatar is now out. Assad still in power, emir of Qatar out. In Turkey, Erdogan, with Obama whispering in his ear late at night, was promised greatness, and instead he had the streets of Istanbul rise up against him. So he is profoundly frightened at this point. He wants to lead from behind even more than Obama. So Erdogan is also pulling back. And Libya was another one that was trying to do something in favor of Morsi, all in vain. And they didn't give enough money. Now, the new group of money givers, and this does not mean that these are the people who backed the coup. They are people who are trying to jump on a train that is leaving the station. This is now Saudi, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, and they're coughing up quite a bit of money. So that's the financing. Now, in terms of the politics of the coup, the U.S. Through Obama has now said, Morsi was really rather authoritarian, right? He was oppressive, words to this effect. And now a lot of people say, you see, Obama organized the coup. No. We also have one debate I was in. My debate adversary said, no, you see, General Sisi, the defense minister, was on the phone with Secretary Hagel at the Pentagon right before the coup. That means the coup was coordinated with Washington. No, it doesn't mean that. It means he called him and he said, hey, Chuck, we're going to have a coup. So I hope you like that. And we're not consulting you, we're informing you. And I think that's the form it took. We're informing you, not consulting you. If you want to say that the U.S. was consulted, prove it. But the existence of the phone call doesn't prove it. The word from the New York Times is that Susan Rice was doing everything she could to save Morsi, and I would add what the New York Times doesn't add. She was doing everything she could to save Morsi so he could start the attack on Syria. That's the point. That's what Morsi meant to them at this juncture. But when Morsi gave that midnight speech, that was judged to be so raving and so tone deaf and so dumb, right? Not clever. He could have helped himself. He refused. He's a doctrinaire. He's a takfiri. He's a holier-than-thou. And even inside the Muslim Brotherhood, we'll talk about this in a minute, they're factional opposition. So this is not a U.S. coup. This is, if anything, an anti-U.S. coup. Mason has it right, and the others who don't grasp it in that way have it wrong. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to our second hour here on World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., directing your kind attention, as always, to tarpley.net, and summer reading time. Go to tarpley.net, select one of the classics written by yours truly, and take that to your hammock, take that on your long flight, and you'll find your ability to understand the current world situation and act in it will be qualitatively enhanced. That much I promise you on just about any of those books. In particular, the Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion is the key to the factional situation involving Petraeus and others. By the way, we just want to, having mentioned Petraeus, if you're in New York City, do something to stop Petraeus from siphoning $200,000 out of the City University of New York for one course and 10 or 15 or 20 students, one course, one semester, $200,000. It's been estimated that you could send more than 20 low-income kids to college with tuition and fees paid. You could buy books for 125 or so poor kids with that money. Why do we have to put that into Petraeus's pocket, right? To prop him up so that he can come back later with a military dictatorship according to his long prepared plan? I hope not. So there's a saving that could be made right away. Don't pay a warmonger. We're also the situation of these universities, where we had Bob Kerry, warmonger, getting the control of the new school for a while. And now we've got Napolitano taking over the University of California. What could a thug like Napolitano know about education? Boy, this imposition of various totalitarian measures under Napolitano, not too doggone good. Good riddance to her, but too bad for the University of California. All right. The Egypt situation, it is a counter coup. Now, there is this law that says if you call it a coup, you must cut off aid. The law is patently unconstitutional. You can't really do that kind of thing, and Obama can always certify that this is a national security necessity. So don't repeat that particular thing. But it's a counter coup. It's a coup, but it's in the form of a counter coup. I have published now on Tarpley.net. Go take a look through Press TV. Take a look at the proof that Military circles and top administrators in Egypt were appalled. They were horrified by the catastrophic war that Morsi was preparing. He was plotting to embroil the Egyptian military against Syria and perhaps also against Ethiopia, and that is catastrophic. But that's very much the scorched earth policy of the most extreme people in the imperialist camp. Now, who might have been urging him on, right? Think of Saddam Hussein and April Glaspie 25 years ago, almost, quarter century, 2 decades ago. Well, the U.S. ambassador to Egypt is Ann Patterson. And Ann Patterson is hated in Egypt because of her constant interference in sovereign affairs of Egypt. But she is Morsi's #1 backer. Again, the thesis that the Obama administration kicked out Morsi from 1 minute to the next, why would they do that? That's not the point. They wanted to use him to destroy Egypt, destroy Ethiopia, destroy Syria, and then take it from there. She was widely hated, and she had made statements in the run-up to the fall of Morsi. This Ann Patterson, U.S. ambassador to Cairo, told the opposition, right? This is sort of the liberal, golden youth, secular opposition, but that includes Nasserists, leftists, and others. She basically said, don't come out and demonstrate, right? You're too extreme. You got to solve your problems some other way. And this made her hated. Now, I urge you to go to IntelliHub. This is one place you can find it. The article itself comes from Before It's News, dated July 2nd, and it's full of pictures that you haven't seen. Here's one from Cairo. From Tahrir Square to the U.S. media and the Muslim Brotherhood. Obama, you jerk, writes this sign from the streets of Cairo. Muslim Brotherhood is killing the Egyptians, so how come they can guarantee you the security of Israel? Hey, Obama, your deal with the Muslim Brotherhood is unsuccessful. Obama, you idiot, keep in mind that Egypt is not the Muslim Brotherhood. Good. There we have the next one, a picture of Ann Patterson and a big red cross across her face. She's wearing a stylish tailleur, and it says, kick this bitch out of Egypt, because she supports Morsi, obviously. Then we have another one, even more explicit. Obama and Patterson, with pictures of both. Obama and Ann Patterson, U.S. ambassador. Obama and Patterson support terrorism in Egypt. Now, that means Morsi. If you were watching Paula Sleer of RT, she tried to bootleg this in. Paula Sleer was arguing that the coup was organized by the U.S. Yeah, sure. The U.S. is the fountain of all evil. I guess it is. But in this case, it's not. In this case, it is an indigenous coup coming from the army and the administration to save the nation from Morsi and, above all, from his lunatic foreign adventure. So Obama and Patterson support terrorism in Egypt. Here's another guy on Twitter says, ever notice the striking similarity between the Obama campaign logo 2008 and the logo for the Salafi al-Nur party? If you want to see these pictures, go to Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, go down to, a couple of days ago, and you'll see them. And now there are just a couple more. Here's another good one. Obama, your bitch is our dictator. That means Morsi. Here's another one. Obama supports terrorism. This is the podium of a big outdoor demo. And then they got a mug of Morsi with a big yellow cross over his face. And here's another one. Obama supports terrorism with a big central Cairo building that you've seen on TV in the background. So you get it? The Cairo street says Obama supported Morsi, that they know that Susan Rice, thanks to the New York Times, was negotiating to save Morsi up to the 11th hour and the 12th hour when he made that lunatic midnight speech that he would not give up and he wouldn't compromise and he wouldn't back down and all the rest of this stuff. So I'm afraid that people who claim that this is all done by the U.S., and we mentioned some of them last week. We don't need to go through this again. They have got it wrong. Now then, there's also the question of the Muslim Brotherhood itself. Was his support compact? We saw that the Noor party, the Salafis, meaning paid for by Saudi Arabia and getting more money from Saudi Arabia than Morsi was getting from Qatar, turns out, in retrospect. The Noor party turned against him at the key moment. How about his own Ikhwan, his own Muslim Brotherhood? The Ikhwan was split because some of them said, look, Morsi is going too far too fast. His total power grab is going to cause a backlash, a boomerang effect. Tell him to slow down. Right? Morsi is too extreme, say some of them. And we've got in the past day or two the head of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the largest in Cairo, or one of the big ones in Cairo, calling for peace and reconciliation, not what the Muslim Brotherhood is calling for. The Muslim Brotherhood says they want the uprising of the Egyptian people. So there it is. It's not a U.S. coup. It's an anti-U.S. coup. It targets the alliance of the CIA and the Muslim Brotherhood worldwide. And we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now let us attempt to address a somewhat deeper question, right? Was the Muslim Brotherhood right for Egypt? I mean, was there some case to be made in favor of this government, right? The decisive trigger in the short term is Morsi's aggressive plan to embroil this country in a catastrophic war. And this we don't give up on. This is the fact. Attack Syria and or Ethiopia and get Syria involved in this Sunni versus Shiite massacre, catastrophe, which would destroy the Middle East. But that's the main imperialist policy, and he was willing to go along with that. Now, I want to refer to things that have been put up on, from Kevin Barrett, whom I consider a friend, but he says that I am misinformed about Egypt and that I interpret Egypt exclusively through the lens of Syria. No. The problem with Morsi is, first of all, economics. His capitulation, his sellout to the International Monetary Fund in regard to Egypt. Remember, the campaign of the Muslim Brotherhood was, we will raise the incomes of the poorest workers and peasants. And then they turn around and make a deal with the IMF, the main force of usury in the world, the most anti-Islamic of institutions. They sign a letter of intent, they accept conditionalities, they double the price of gasoline, a regressive action. They increase the sales tax, another regressive action. They signal that they're ready for a value-added tax. These are catastrophic measures. And this is the beginning of the end of Morsi. This is where the political conditions for his fall were generated, right? For the elites, it's this thing with Syria, which they can see. Maybe the people in the streets don't know, but the people in the streets sure as hell know when we've got the doubling of the price of gasoline and the increase of the sales tax with more taxes still to come. And obviously, the Muslim Brotherhood signaling that they are willing to attack the subsidies left over from Nasser. These subsidies are the heart of the economy, right? Egypt obviously needs about 20 million acres of new productive land, which would be irrigated. They do have the water. It's called the Nile. There's the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and no matter what Ethiopia does, there's going to be plenty of water in Lake Nasser and plenty of ways to develop that extra grain production. One of the main goals for this country is to make it self-sufficient in grain. Right now, Egypt is the biggest international grain buyer, and this is a tremendous vulnerability because it's the U.S. that controls the grain spigot, and this is not good. And it's used for blackmail purposes. So that's where Morsi got himself into trouble. The other thing, of course, is that Morsi's, his authoritarian tendencies, his desire to grab all power, these were only too obvious. As he went along, he put out these decrees back in November, December was the main one, saying, I'm above the law. My actions cannot be reviewed by the Supreme Court. I am not subjected to judicial review. And there are other decrees at lower levels, right, which do the same sort of thing. So it's impossible to say this was a rigorously constitutional government that was overthrown by a coup that was absolutely illegal, because the Constitution that he was operating under was a thing of shreds and patches, something that he had made up largely himself along the way, coming out of a constitutional convention that was packed, was illegitimate, was loaded, right? Remember the Islamists took the lion's share and they wouldn't allow the others, right? So there are so many problems with this. It's not clear-cut at all. But let's even go to the deeper level. Kevin's thesis is that the main enemy in the Middle East is the deep state. And the deep state is the same all over, but people in the Middle East want to get rid of the deep state, and they want an Islamic society. Well, let's look at this. He says, don't pay any attention to the secularists. Well, there are secularists, right? In Cairo, in Alexandria, how many there are, I don't know. Are they 5% of the Egyptian population? Are they 10%? I don't know. But there are secularists, right? And they're going to be important people. There are also Copts. There are 10% of the Egyptian population who are Copts. So you might get up to 20, 25% who somehow won't identify themselves in a strict Islamic government. He also adds that majorities in Egypt and across the Islamic world want strict application of Sharia. Now that I would have to examine in quite a bit of detail to understand what version are you talking about, because there are quite a few different Sharias, right? There's the Taliban version, there's the Saudi Wahhabite version, there's the Saudi Salafist version. There are any number, and Turkey and Syria don't have this, and they have done well without it. And I'm not at all sure whether this is the answer in a country as diverse already as Egypt. And then if you look at someplace like Syria, which is even more diverse, there you're going to find some problems. And above all, is it the Sunni version or the Shiite version? Because in Egypt, the Shiites are maybe 1% to 2% as far as I can see, but again, they would then line up with these other groups. Are all of them going to be disenfranchised? But let's look even further at the deep state. Well, the deep state in the Arab world means, in many cases, something quite different. If we look at Saudi Arabia, you tell me what the deep state in Saudi Arabia is. It's the royal family. You look at the Gulf, look at Qatar, look at Kuwait, look at the United Arab Emirates, look at Oman, and so forth. The deep state there is an absolute monarchy. So don't tell me that the deep state is the same all over the world. This extends to Morocco. This extends to Jordan. The deep state is an absolute monarchy. If we then look at Syria today, Libya under Gaddafi, and other places like this, what you find is a Nasserist authoritarian government, which is ultimately military. Mubarak is more or less the same thing. These governments have fallen way short of the original goals of Nasserism, but a large part of that is that they've been under such constant imperialist attack. The imperialists have left no doubt when the British and the U.S. supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in the 1950s against Nasser, they are telling you what their strategic choices are. Nasser seized the Suez Canal, built the Aswan High Dam. The British and the French and the U.S. say, well, we're going with the Muslim Brotherhood against that kind of policy. And this has not changed. This is going on until now. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio with Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. The counter-coup in Egypt by, I'm guessing, Nasserist elements in the army joined by Nasserist elements in the administration. Now, what has happened since then, we have, obviously, we got problems. We've got this new president, right, Mansour, and he has brought in the new prime minister, who is a puppet of the IMF. He's a neoliberal. And then we've got al-Baradei as vice president, and he's also a neoliberal puppet of the International Monetary Fund. So these people have to go. It's just that easy. But think about the French Revolution. What you see is a process of radicalization where one group is replaced by another group. For example, the Girondins are overtaken. It turns out, they're, at the beginning they're quite radical, but then they're not radical enough. And then the Jacobins come forward, and they are more radical, and they go further. And then the extreme mountain, right, the Robespierre faction, takes over from the larger Jacobins. You get the idea. In other words, it's a series of leadership groups, and one is pushed aside by another one, which is more and more radical, until you reach Thermidor. Now, I don't want to mix this metaphor too much, but there is no one-to-one mechanistic comparison here. But what we might have just had is Thermidor, or maybe let's say we're headed towards Thermidor, I hope. Thermidor, of course, is the moment where Robespierre is kicked out, right, and liquidated. And the people who come to the fore in Thermidor, Lazare Carnot, the organizer of victory, a military man, a genius for logistics, administration, production. He declares the levée en masse, that everybody should mobilize for the survival of the motherland and the revolution. Moments like this, I think, are likely to be in the offing. What counts now, everything depends on the subjective factors. And what we've got to have are nationalist forces. I pointed to Hamdin Sabahi. There are other Nasserists. What you've got to do is organize with a program, because the Golden Youth in the streets, they have no program. The Muslim Brotherhood's program is to capitulate to the International Monetary Fund. They're joined in that by al-Baradei and this other guy who's now the prime minister. So we've got to have a program of how to live without the IMF. The guy's name is Bab Lamia and al-Baradei, right? The two IMF guys. So you got to push them aside, because here's the big issue now. This is obviously going to be a defensive battle to begin with. The subsidies. This week, National Public Radio, I've heard it twice myself, they're doing a campaign that the food subsidies in Egypt are unsustainable. The news broadcast this week said, those bread subsidies, which are unsustainable. That was the news broadcast. That was not some guy editorializing. And today, Martin Walker of the UPI on the Diane Rehm Weekly Review, the food subsidies are unsustainable. No, they're not. At least Martin Walker, however, said, look, in order to save the Egyptian economy, you got to get rid of the food subsidies. He's crazy. But he said nobody is going to dare to do that until some election, because anybody who does it will be dead in the water politically. Yes, that's exactly what Morsi did. Morsi declared war on the subsidies, and he was junked. He was gotten rid of. So don't do it. What we need is an aggressive populist, and I think it's Hamdin Sabahi, coming forward to say, no, we're going to defend those subsidies. In some cases, we're going to increase them, and we're going to have the Tahrir tax. Let's have the fat cats with more than $7 million pay a one-time 10% levy, so they give back what they gouged under the days of Mubarak. Now, a couple of comparisons. The Muslim Brotherhood called themselves Muslim. I've tried to argue that's not what they are. They're the rich. They're rich businessmen, doctors, lawyers, editors, professors. They're the 1% or the 2% of the society. So it's all very well to talk about the deep state, but then there's just the economic oligarchs, the financial and economic and business oligarchs of a country like Egypt, right? It's a place where finance is not as central as, it's not so cancerous and pervasive as here in the United States or Great Britain, but it's there. And then you have these business guys, right? So they're all with a mentality of exploitation, which is hidden by the social work that they do in order to sell themselves to the masses. As Machiavelli says, the few always act in the interests of the few. The few serve the few. And this is the Muslim Brotherhood. So make no mistake about that. It is a cloak. In the past week, I've called attention to Davila's history of the French wars of religion in the 1500s, where the nobility decides to become Calvinists and Huguenots in order to get mass support for a rebellion, which they were going to do anyway. And they cynically say, well, we'll cloak this in religious categories and we'll be able to dupe more of the common people. Because if we just say we're fighting for our own interests as an oligarchy of nobles, nobody will be too excited about that. And then it's just the name. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. How Muslim is the Muslim Brotherhood? We'll compare. Angela Merkel of Germany represents what? The Christian Democratic Party, the CDU. So she calls herself Christian. Is she Christian? Her methods are the exact opposite of any Christianity that I've ever heard of. Glorifying the rich, crushing the poor, crushing these countries, the smaller countries of southern Europe as much as she can, glorifying usury and the rich and the bankers and everything else, right? She'd have to call herself, the atheist union, or, and then she's got the Christian Social Union of Bavaria, right? It would have to be the Christian antisocial or sociopaths union of Bavaria. So you get the idea. Just calling yourself something doesn't mean that you're it. And if you call yourself the Muslim Brotherhood and then you bring in the International Monetary Fund, I'm sorry, that is fraud. And you've got to be able to call a fraud when you see it. The other thing is the desire to mix religion and political power in the first place. Look at Dante. Dante tells you that certainly the genius of Western civilization is that the Pope is one person, the king is a different person, or the duke or the emperor. They are different, and they fight. That is the basis of separation of powers, the opening of the mind, because there are these two authorities. One is temporal, one is spiritual. They don't agree. And that's, on the whole, a very good thing. If we look at the Roman Catholic Church, the best thing that ever happened to them was that they don't have the papal states. Up until 1870, they controlled a considerable swath of central Italy. Their administration was horrendous. They used a branch of the mafia, the Sanfedisti, which was the mafia. As we go up the boot, right, from the Sicilian mafia to the Calabrian and 'Ndrangheta to the Neapolitan Camorra. By the time you get to Rome and slightly above to Bologna, those are the Sanfedisti. And it was a mafia that was the basis of the papal administration. Nothing could be worse. So even though you couldn't tell it to the Vatican for the best part of 100 years, the best thing that happened to them was to lose the temporal power over those papal states. They've done much better since then, and you can imagine the embarrassment of Bergoglio if he had to rule over such a congeries today. So for all of these reasons, I'm afraid the case for the Muslim Brotherhood will not hold water. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's already our last segment. Got to get in some important themes. Concerning the fight against U.S. domestic austerity, which remains the principal thrust of agitation, there was an attempt this week in the House to separate the food stamp budget, SNAP, from the Farm Bill. This is a reactionary trick. Don't let it happen. In order to do the log rolling in the proper way, the food stamp budget must be joined with the farm subsidy budget. In other words, we want two things: the full funding, generous funding of the food stamp budget, more than what we have today, plus parity prices for farmers. Don't separate them. Anybody proposing such a separation is a reactionary Republican proposing to dump the poor. But the contempt, the genocidal animus of the Republicans against low-income people who rely on food stamps and WIC and other Head Start and other programs, this could not be more clear, right? In the case of Head Start, out of this program, it's about a $500 million cut in the availability of it. So this is absolutely destructive. Concerning student loans, the Congress has failed to do anything, and we are holding fast on the original Elizabeth Warren proposal. Whatever she says now about, stopgap measures or temporizing, we want the full 0.75% student loans paid for by the Federal Reserve. That Federal Reserve pays feature is absolutely critical. Don't give that up under any circumstances. So this issue is going to remain in the public eye. There's also the question of immigration. We'll deal with this in coming programs. Remember, July 1st, the student loan rate doubled. October 1st is the new fiscal year. If we don't have a budget, there will be government shutdowns and more killer cuts, more genocidal austerity brought on by these Tea Party fanatics with some collusion, of course, from the Wall Street Democrats. And then beyond that, the debt ceiling. And there must be no giving in on the debt ceiling. The 14th Amendment, we fought the Civil War. The debt at Gettysburg died so that we could have the 14th Amendment. You're not allowed to go bankrupt. The public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. We can't have anti-state actors, subversives, anarchists, lunatics coming in and trying to destroy the form of government that we've chosen because of their personal heteronomy or their status as sociopaths. Concerning Walmart in the District of Columbia, I would applaud the City Council of the District of Columbia for forcing a living wage of some sort, a $12.50 an hour living wage on Walmart. I would have recommended to them that they let Walmart build their stores, open them up, operate them for a few months, and then go with the living wage. This is probably not very clever to do this in advance because, of course, at this point, Walmart says, oh, we'll pick up our dollies and go home, right? We're going to freeze you out. The Walmart low-wage model is killing the United States. The United States is historically a high-wage country. That is the essence of the U.S. economic success story. High wages and, fought for, to be sure, not given away, but eventually obtained. That was the reality over many, many decades and centuries. If you go to the Confederate model, right, this is a small discount chain from the Ozarks that has grown like a cancer. The Confederate model, of course, is low wage. Low wage is a loser. With low wage, the Chinese eat you alive, and others will eat you. The Vietnamese will eat you alive, and so on down the line. And the union busting that goes with it. So I would say to Walmart, we don't want you. We don't want what you call economic development. And if Vincent Gray, the mayor of the District of Columbia, goes for that, that's really unfortunate. Now, let's try to do as much as we can with Bradley Manning, with Assange, and with Snowden. I would call special attention to the argument made by the Bradley Manning defense at Fort Meade, Maryland, this past week. The defense argues for Bradley Manning. His lawyers say that what Bradley Manning released was not new. There was nothing new. It was all available in open source, public domain sources. Yes, that's exactly what I've been arguing, that the limited hangout artists, and that includes this unfortunate guy who should be released, right? I agree with him. It's precisely true. He didn't reveal anything new, so let him go. Let him out of there. Give him his freedom. This is crazy. But the fact is, before you make Assange the hero of your life, listen to that defense team saying there's nothing new here. It's all from open sources. It was all in the public domain before he brought it forward. We're also reminded that echelon, right, the thing that the Europeans are screaming about, right, the echelon of U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Anglo-Saxon conspiracy. Echelon was known in 1998, 1999 under Clinton, and there were debates, hearings in the European Parliament about how Europe was being spied on by the Anglo-Saxons. Okay, now we've got the meeting of Amnesty and Human Rights Watch at the Moscow airport with Snowden. And we've got Snowden apparently now asking for diplomatic asylum, for humanitarian asylum in the Russian Federation. But watch out. Putin had wisely laid down his sort of anti-provocateur rules, saying, look, you can stay, but you got to stop being a provocateur. You got to stop causing trouble for the Russian Federation and the bilateral ties to the United States. Snowden thinks that he's very smart. Snowden's argument is, I don't do any harm. I've never done any harm. I can continue to do exactly what I've been doing so far because I haven't harmed anybody. So, that's a nice verbal construct. But I predict Snowden is a provocateur. He will cause trouble. Snowden will try to cause trouble between the United States and the Russian Federation because that's his job. He is a provocateur. It's also interesting that at this press conference, or the meeting that was attended by these human rights characters in Moscow, Russia Today was not invited. So after all of the airtime and the adulation that Russia Today devoted to Snowden, his ingratitude was no special treatment for you. We're not letting you into this meeting. We're not giving you anything special. The other thing about this is, from the Russia Today point of view, if you're going to accredit the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International of Moscow, those are anti-Putin forces that you're building up. I'm wondering, did Navalny come? Did Alexei Navalny, the main agitator and torpedo against the Russian government, did he come to see Snowden? Because these are like peas in a pod. They agree on so much. And the problem with Russia Today is that so many of the people they put on there hate Russia. I'm sure Snowden ultimately hates Russia, and he will be acting that out. And we will see that as time goes on. Oh, and today they had Dave Lindorf, who is now one of the main pro-Snowden activists. He wants to fight back against anybody who doesn't want to be a groupie and a camp follower for Snowden. So this is the status. We're also interested in Sarah Harrison, Assange's girlfriend, a British citizen who has been sent in, it looks like, as a controller, as a minder for Snowden. Remember, Snowden's father, Lonnie Snowden, complained that Assange will not let him talk to his son, and that Glenn Greenwald said that statements that have been put out attributed to Snowden were actually written by Assange. So there's a whole nest of intrigue, lies, deception in this area. Babich on Russia Today, interesting analysis. He says, look, what Putin is asking from Snowden is what the French asked from Khomeini. When Khomeini was in exile in France in the 1970s, Giscard d'Estaing and people like this said, look, you can come, but you can't agitate. Of course, he did. I think the Russians are going to be more demanding. So remember also that everything that Snowden has submitted has been screened by The Guardian and The Washington Post. So you're not out of the hands of the controlled corporate media with Snowden. You're very much in their hands. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, the Syrian situation is developing rapidly, and the imperialist cause is taking it on the chin in quite a few of these most recent developments. The very interesting news this morning is that a top commander of the Free Syrian Army, that is to say a moderate terrorist, not an extremist terrorist, has been killed by one of the al-Qaeda extremists in this despicable combination. The victim is Kamal Hamami. Kamal Hamami, a commander of the Free Syrian Army, again, allegedly a moderate, not the extreme wing, has been assassinated by the al-Qaeda groupings. Now, this Kamal Hamami is also known under the name of Abu Basir al-Ladkhani. He is allegedly one of the top 30 members of the Supreme Military Command of the, in quotes, Free Syrian Army. Gee, I wonder what General Salim Idris, the golden boy, the darling of the CIA, has to say about this. I wonder if Hamami himself, Hamami Ladkhani, as he's sometimes known, whether this Hamami Ladkhani is also a darling of the CIA. Now, the killing was carried out personally by a certain Louay Mekdad. Mekdad is, he's to admit that there have been numbers of clashes between the people coming in from Iraq and the other more indigenous people. The FSA and the Islamic State have had violent exchanges in several areas of Syria over the past 2 weeks, showing the growing antagonism between Assad's foes. Last Friday, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant killed an FSA rebel in Idlib province and cut his head off, decapitated him. And there have been attacks in many provinces, says this tailor, Rami Abdel Rahman, right, paid by Rifat Assad, as far as published reports have alleged. So this is the situation. It is a tremendous embarrassment for anybody proposing to support these killers, and that includes the Obama administration. So remember, the benchmarks are these. Obama has one merit. Up to now, he says no to the 1,000-bomber raid and the 5 divisions and the tanks and the infantry and the big ground assault and everything that goes with it. No to that. No to the carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea. No, 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 says Obama. Do it all on the cheap. Do it all through these other means, right? Use proxy forces, play Turkey, play Egypt, play others against the government of Assad, but that's not working. So it's important to hold on to the fact that Obama is saying no to the big war. He says yes to the little war, absolutely, to the treacherous war, the stealth war, cyber, economic sanctions, assassinations, drones, telling us. This is the guy reporting the assassination. Mekdad is telling us he's the FSA Supreme Command political coordinator, the political commissar of Idris, it looks like. He says that the killer is Abu Ayman al-Baghdadi. Al-Baghdadi sounds like he's coming in from Iraq, probably somebody who's killed a lot of U.S. forces there. He is the emir of the coastal region for this alleged Islamic State, which is what one of the groups at least wants, right? Whether it's the Nusra network, that's harder to say, but one of the members of the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. The Levant, of course, the Levante, the east, right? The place where the sun comes up. That's the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. It's essentially Lebanon and Syria, and it goes inland up to a point. So members of that emirate, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. So these are terrorists coming in from Iraq. They are undoubtedly veterans of the fighting against the U.S. forces there. How interesting. And these are the people that the British and the French want to support, and that the Obama administration says we should now arm. Well, that's not a good idea, is it? So the fighting among the death squads is now the shocking new reality. And, of course, that means if you give advanced weapons to the so-called moderates of the FSA, then along come the Nusra people and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and they kill the moderate beneficiaries, and they take the advanced weapons and use them according to their nefarious goals. Even the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the British tailor in Coventry, linked to Rifat Assad, right, the half-brother of the elder Assad, right, this older group, they a bullet, nothing for the death squads, for the killers, the crazies in Syria. We don't want any part of them, and if you do, that will be a Nuremberg crime. So what we have in this interesting article, the vocabulary above all, is highly interesting. We're told that it's a quagmire in the making, and we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is the edition for Friday, the 12th of July. Congratulations to the French for their national holiday coming up on Sunday, the 14th of July, right? The French Revolution, a very interesting thing to keep in mind when you look at Egypt, because there are some interesting comparisons, which we will elaborate maybe a little bit today, but primarily in future weeks. Right now, it's the fact that the al-Qaeda branch, the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, their top coastal emir, has killed Kamal Hamami, a moderate, in quotes, Free Syrian Army commander. So the takfiris, the holier-than-thous, the sectarians, I'm tempted to call them the Gnasio Islamists, right? Remember the old Gnasio Lutherans of the late 1500s, right? The real hardliners, the real doctrinaires, nobody good enough for them, and if you're not good enough, watch out, they'll behead you. So this Kamal Hamami is dead, and this means open war between the moderate FSA of Idris and the al-Qaeda link. Now, interesting, which way will the Nusra boys go? Which way will the Farouk brigades go? Right, the Farouk are the people who did the cannibalism of forces, proxies, buck passing, you name it, does all that. But that's not working. So the important thing is to keep Obama, to stop Obama from declaring the big war until the death squads have been eliminated from the picture, dispersed or hurled to their reward. So this is the relevance now also of the other side of the coin, which this news this morning is going to make worse. New front open in Syria as rebels say al-Qaeda attack means war. Now, open war between the rebel factions. How interesting. Yesterday already, Thursday, July 12th, we have the main headline of the Washington Post. Divisions on the Hill stall Syria plan. The Obama administration's month-old plan to arm opposition fighters in Syria has stalled as a result of congressional disagreements over whether and how to aid the rebels seeking to oust President Bashar al-Assad. And here we find the people who have failed. Briefings and personal visits have come from top administration officials, including Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of State John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, and we'll get to him later. We want him impeached. And the CIA Director John O'Brien have failed to shake strongly held views in the U.S. Congress, according to various administration officials and congressional sources. So let's just look at a little bit of this delicious detail. Now, this is something that people in the United States can and must contribute to. Those congressional hacks will be going home for the summer vacation before too long. They're going to have public meetings. You've got to go to them and say, not one penny, not one